Richard Langford didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just glanced down the table and said, like he was commenting on the weather, "This rollout would move twice as fast if my son managed it." The air in the conference room tightened. Someone's pen stopped mid-scratch. The HVAC hummed like it was suddenly too loud. I sat at the far end of the polished table. Operations lead, only woman on the ops side of the board meeting, and I felt every subtle shift of attention slide toward me. Neutral remark, that's what they wanted it to be. It wasn't. It was a blade wrapped in corporate etiquette. Connor Langford sat 2 seats away, pressed suit, perfect hair, that easy confidence people wear when failure has never cost them anything. When my eyes met his, he gave me a small, amused half-smile, like he'd already won. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. But I did feel the folded resignation letter in my notebook, like a weight I'd been carrying for months. Richard continued, "Connor understands the pace our clients demand. Bella's approach is careful." The word careful hung there coded, and poisonous, slow, outdated, not built for the future. At the head of the table, Elias Mercer, founder of Windhaven Systems, the man everyone waited on before they breathed, leaned back in his chair with that unreadable calm. The board watched him like he was a judge deciding whether someone walked free. Elias said nothing. Not yet. I'd learned something about silence at Windhaven. Sometimes it's weakness, and sometimes it's a trap being set. I stood slowly, letting the chair legs whisper against the floor. "If you want Connor to take the project," I said, voice steady enough to surprise even me, "then you can have this too." I placed the resignation letter on the table like a final receipt. Connor's smile sharpened. Richard's eyes flicked down to the paper and back up satisfied, like months of maneuvering had finally paid off. Elias finally spoke, cool and flat. "Fine, give the project to Connor." Connor straightened, already tasting victory. Then Elias turned his gaze to me. "Bella, 10 minutes. My office. Bring the letter." No warmth, no anger, no reassurance. Just command. And somehow that was worse than sympathy. I walked out with the resignation letter in my hand, and a certainty crawling up my spine. Whatever waited behind Elias Mercer's door wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be fair. But it was going to change everything. 10 years earlier, I'd moved to Portland with 1 suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and the kind of stubborn hope you can only afford when you have nothing else. I didn't come to Windhaven Systems looking for power. I came for stability. The kind that lets you sleep without calculating rent in your head. For a while, I found it. Back then, Richard Langford barely acknowledged me. A nod in the hallway, a polite nothing. Indifference is easy compared to what comes after. When someone finally notices you and decides you're in the way. During the pandemic, when contracts were cracking and clients were panicking, I built the workflows that kept Windhaven from bleeding out. 14-hour days. 3 monitors. Coffee that tasted like desperation. I stitched together operational dependencies that made impossible timelines survivable. My director at the time, Lacey Monroe, called me her anchor. Richard called it luck. That was the moment I understood we weren't living in the same reality. Then Connor arrived. Richard introduced him at a staff meeting with a proud hand on his shoulder. "Fresh eyes," he said, looking straight at me, like experience was a flaw and youth was an upgrade. Connor shook my hand with a firm grip and a practiced smile. "I've heard your ops work is solid," he said. The pause before solid told me everything. The changes didn't hit like a wrecking ball. They came like termites. A meeting that always included operations suddenly didn't require my presence. A report I wrote came back with edits that didn't just tweak the language. They shifted credit. An error Connor made in a dashboard was quietly corrected in the final version, but the blame stayed attached to my department. When I asked Jakey, one of my most reliable team leads, he lowered his voice. "We see it, Bella. We just can't push back. You know how Richard works." I did know, and that's why I started documenting everything. Emails, file versions, timestamps, access logs, quiet notes in the margins of my day that said if they rewrite the story, I'll still have the original. Connor played the role perfectly. In meetings, he'd interrupt with, Actually, what we're doing is. And then explain the thing I'd just built, like he invented it during his morning run. When someone asked a hard question, he'd glance at Richard, and Richard would answer for him with confidence that wasn't earned. Modernization, Richard would say, tapping the table. New leadership energy. Then the board started repeating it like a chorus. Modernization, energy, pace, future. And always, quietly between the lines, Bella is the past. The morning I got Richard's first performance update, I knew the ground had tilted too far to pretend otherwise. It wasn't feedback, it was a rewrite. My name appeared once, tucked into a bullet point like an afterthought, operations support provided as needed. As needed. Like I hadn't been holding the company together with duct tape and precision. At the next leadership meeting, Richard projected a slide that blamed process inefficiencies on outdated workflows. He looked at the board with the calm of a man selling a narrative. Connor leaned forward, feigning humility. I've been testing a new pipeline. If we scale it, we could shave weeks off delivery. Helen Rodas, one of the board members, nodded. Speed is what matters. I spoke up. Speed without compliance is a liability. Some steps Connor wants removed are required under the client contract. Richard's smile tightened. Contracts can be renegotiated. They can, I said, keeping my voice level, but not without disclosure. Not without legal review. Not without risking breach. The room held its breath for half a second. Then someone said, "We need modernization, not resistance." That word, resistance, landed on me like a label they'd already printed. And through all of it, Elias Mercer watched. Not agreeing, not rescuing, just watching. By the time I stood in his office with my resignation letter, I wasn't asking to be saved. I was protecting myself, before they turned me into the scapegoat for the mess they were building. Elias didn't tell me to sit. He just looked at the letter like it was a chess piece. "You brought this today?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because your board is letting Richard Langford set my career on fire," I wanted to say. Instead, I told him the clean truth. Richard's been clearing the runway for Connor for months. Today wasn't spontaneous, and if I stay, I become the excuse. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you think Connor can't handle?" I didn't soften it. The dependencies, the contractual layers, the risk structures we negotiated during the pandemic. These workflows don't just run, they protect us. Pull the wrong piece, and the whole thing collapses. Elias exhaled like he'd been waiting for confirmation. I suspected as much. Suspected what? That Richard has been feeding the board selective metrics, he said, glossing over Connor's mistakes, presenting progress that doesn't align with the raw numbers. He tapped his desk once. I needed proof that wasn't inside our building. My pulse kicked. "So you watched." "I waited," he corrected. "Because if I moved too early, Richard would bury the trail." He opened a drawer and slid a business card across the desk. "North River Analytics." I stared at it. "You want me to work for them?" "I want you where Richard can't touch your work," Elias said. "If you resign, I'll accept it, but I won't let your competence get swallowed by someone else's ambition." The card felt heavier than paper should. And I understood something. Finally, Elias hadn't been passive, he'd been positioning. North River Analytics greeted me with clean offices, polite smiles, and binders stacked like weapons. Their director, Dana Caldwell, shook my hand and didn't waste time pretending this was routine. "We appreciate you coming," she said, leading me to a small conference table. "Wind Haven's reports haven't aligned with our projections for months." She lowered her voice. "Elias said you're the only person who can clarify the gaps." Only person. I opened the first binder and felt my stomach tighten. The timeline on page 1 looked like my work, until it didn't. Steps were missing. Milestones relabeled. Metrics smoothed into tidy curves that reality never produces. I flagged a line and called Dana over. "Where did this version come from?" "Richard Langford sent it," she said. "He said operations approved the adjustments." "I never approved any of this." Dana's face shifted from confusion to something sharper. "Then why does it say you streamlined the process?" Because Connor needed to look like a hero, I thought. Because Richard needed a reason to push me out. Instead, I said, because someone is manufacturing results. 2 hours later, Dana returned with system logs. Look at these timestamps, she said. They show Connor's efficiency breakthroughs, happening before the work even existed. I leaned in, scanning until I found it. My draft language, my risk notes, my contingency structure, copied, repackaged, timestamped like it came from Connor's pipeline. My hands went cold. I called Jake. Did Richard access my archived files? I asked. Jake hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. He asked IT for credential overrides. Jake said quietly. Said it was for a board audit. My voice went tight, and they gave it to him. Yeah. When I hung up, the room felt too bright. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a strategy. By day 3, North River's compliance lead, Marcus, joined us. Dana spread the documents across the table while I laid them side by side, tracing the pattern. This projection? I said, tapping the first report. Relays on Connor's supposed throughput gains. Dana pointed to the second. But this log shows the error streak continuing. It's not Connor's log, I said. It's my preliminary draft. He copied it and changed timestamps. Marcus's jaw tightened. And this? I flipped to the budget section. Unauthorized reallocations. Tens of thousands moved into Connor's pilot. Then the report claims the savings came from my department. Dana swallowed. Bella, this is intentional. Marcus nodded once. This triggers an automatic audit. I slid the folder toward him. Send everything to Elias Mercer. And to Windhaven's board. Marcus didn't argue. Today. By late afternoon, the audit packet was sealed, signatures, metadata, origin tracing, access logs. Proof that the altered files came from accounts under Richard Langford's authority. The story he'd built, meeting by meeting, slide by slide, was about to collapse under the weight of its own lies. The emergency board meeting hit within 24 hours. I wasn't invited, but Jake called me the second he stepped into the hallway, voice low and urgent. Bella, it's chaos. I heard muffled shouting through the phone, then Elias Mercer's voice. Clear, controlled, and colder than I'd ever heard it. Richard, Elias said. Explain the discrepancies. Richard's reply was thin. Those logs were taken out of context. Elias didn't blink. North River traced the alterations to your authorization. This isn't context. It's control. Helen Rodas cut in, sharp as broken glass. You missiled this board for months. Connor's voice jumped in defensive. My dad didn't mislead anyone. The data was misinterpreted. Sit down, Connor, Elias said. No anger, just authority. Your revised workflow collapsed the moment Bella stepped out, and the audit shows you removed required steps from a federally monitored contract. Silence followed. Heavy, lethal. Connor tried again, desperate now. She could have helped if she hadn't quit. Helen didn't let him breathe. She quit because you pushed her out. Jakey whispered into the phone, almost disbelieving. Bella, you should see their faces. Another board member spoke, formal and final. Connor Langford will step down from all project authority effective immediately. Connor sputtered. You can't. Elias cut through it. And Richard Langford is suspended pending full investigation. The room went quiet, and through Jake's phone I could feel reputations cracking like ice. Then Helen said something I didn't expect. We owe Bella Harrington an apology. I closed my eyes, pressed my fingers to my forehead, and breathed once. Steady, controlled. Not relief, not triumph. Just gravity finally returning to the world. Elias asked to meet me 2 days later at a small cafe near the Willamette River, far from Windhaven's glass towers and curated silence. He was already seated when I arrived. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him like he'd been waiting without impatience. He gestured to the chair. Sit, Bella. I sat. You handled this with discipline, he said. I handled the truth, I replied. That's all. Elias's gaze held mine. That was exactly what I needed. I frowned. You needed me to leave. I needed you outside Richard's reach, he said evenly. If you stayed, he would have buried you in false trails. North River was the only environment he couldn't contaminate. He slid a folder across the table. "This is a long-term independent contract," he said. "You'll consult for North River, and for me directly. Not as an employee." I blinked once. "A's what? A's a partner?" Elias said. The word landed in my chest like something solid and real. "You'll lead the operational architecture for the initiatives we start next quarter," he continued. "Full autonomy, no internal sabotage, no politics." I stared at the folder, then back at him. "You're offering me a way to work without having to fight for air." "Yes," he said simply. I opened the folder just enough to see the terms, the structure, the authority. For the first time in a long time, my talent wasn't being treated like a threat to manage, it was being treated like an asset to protect. "I'll review it tonight," I said. Elias gave the faintest nod. "Take your time. This is your future to choose." I walked out into the Portland afternoon and realized something that surprised me, the ending I'd imagined. Walking back into Wind Haven victorious was too small. I didn't want to return to prove anything. I wanted to build somewhere my work couldn't be stolen, reshaped, or used as a stepping stone for someone else's last name. I signed the consulting contract on a quiet Tuesday morning at North River. Dana Caldwell shook my hand with a warmth that felt earned. "We're glad you're here," she said. No speeches, no applause. Just a clean start. That afternoon, Jake called again. Voice steady in a way I hadn't heard in months. "It's official," he said. Richard's suspension became termination. Connor's out too. The falsified reports voided any appeal. I exhaled slowly. Not satisfaction, not revenge, closure. Jake hesitated, then added, "The company's restructuring. Compliance is rewriting half the policies. People keep saying your resignation didn't break Wind Haven." He paused. "The lies did." When he hung up, I sat back and let the quiet settle in my office. The kind of quiet that isn't tense, isn't waiting for the next attack. Just quiet. Later that week, Elias Mercer appeared in North River's doorway like he owned the air itself. "Settling in?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Good," he replied. "A second contract is coming, bigger than the first. You'll lead it." I nodded once. "I'm ready." When he left, I looked down at the systems I was building. Structures designed to withstand pressure, politics, ego, and sabotage. Wind Haven had relied on me and pretended it didn't. Now they'd rely on the outcomes of my work without ever being able to bury my name again. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, the city moving around me, alive and indifferent and free. I hadn't rebuilt what Wind Haven tried to take. I'd built something they couldn't touch.